So, I mean, just Sai, we started doing this podcast. We're doing all fintech startups. So, like talking to fintech founders, just having conversations, and we're going to be launching, I'd say one every couple of weeks if we can hit that milestone. But yeah, I mean, it kind of, the podcast kind of goes into you as a founder. We kind of like dive into like your past. Like very few people get into Y Combinator. To someone about Stanford, and they said 4% of people get into Stanford. I was thinking about Y Combinator. I'm like, only 1%, if that, get into Y
Yeah.
Combinator now. It's crazy how hard it is to get into that. And, you're one of the few who did it. And I'm like, there's a history behind that, like getting in and then like starting Mercoa. What led you on the journey of becoming an entrepreneur? Like, I guess let's go back to like where you came from,
Yeah.
like as a person. Were you raised in the valley? Like you're in the valley right now, correct? Like, so
Yeah.
you're in San
Yeah.
Francisco.
So live in San Francisco, but I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. Basically spent my entire childhood and like early life there, went to Ohio State University, and then knew by the time I was ready to graduate that I personally wanted to work in tech. I had a desire to like be entrepreneurial, right? Like I did the kind of, I think, quintessential college kid thing of like take entrepreneurship classes and in the business school, try your hand at like group projects, try to start a few things while in college. Like the first business I attempted to start was like a tea business where we were doing like a box of the month of like custom tea blends that a buyer would create themselves. And so I knew that like, look, if building businesses is kind of what I thought it was fun. I thought it's a cool opportunity. And I think there, a little naively, I thought you get more control over your income as an entrepreneur. And so I was like, okay, like, if I want to take my life or my career in a certain direction, it's to try to be the master of my own destiny. And I realized that like if I want to do this, I gotta kind of learn how tech businesses work first. Then I can parlay that into my own thing in the future. And so ironically at OSU, we had a career fair. There was like one company from the Valley that was recruiting to bring folks to San Jose. It was Cisco. And so like it's funny. I like snuck into this career fair. I wasn't part of the college that the career fair was on. I like, printed off my resume on like yellow paper when everyone else had white paper, and just kind of like went at it with this idea of like, look, we'll see what we get, see what we find from this approach. And I got lucky. Cisco offered me an interview sort of the day of. A few days after that, got the job offer, and I was told that they'd move me out to San Jose, California. And so kind of stamped my ticket to come to Silicon Valley and made it out here in the summer of 2013.
And Cisco is like heavy tech. That's like hardware. That has
Yeah.
nothing to do with payments, as far as I know. I mean, they're the underlying tech for payment systems, like the networks.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I got lucky. Like I got hired into Cisco as an IT analyst, really like, which is a very broad title for like business analyst or associate PM. So that was kind of my first taste at like shipping software products, like super nice environment to do it in, right? Like you're shipping it to like thousands of internal employees. Your stakeholders are internal users. And so gathering requirements, working with a team, like going through the sort of the practice of working in a software development lifecycle was what I got from Cisco. At the same time, I also got to meet a lot of other new grads from around the country, and one of those people I met was my co-founder Sandeep. And so the two of us, at Cisco, we did a hackathon together. We like tried to connect a coffee machine to the internet. At that point, like IoT was the new like tech trend, and so I was like, oh, we'll jump on that. And we kind of realized that we liked working with each other. I think at that point, my like expectations of the Valley had been smashed a little bit. Like Cisco's a very corporate environment, and the type of people it attracts are folks who are looking to have a corporate career, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think I had kind of naively come in with this expectation that like most people in the Valley are looking to work for high growth startups. They're really looking for that kind of like next level in their career. And I think that wasn't the case. But again, I got really lucky that I met Sandeep. It was someone who worked at the same place as me and had a very similar sort of mindset around this kind of stuff. And so at Cisco, we started our first venture, like sort of on nights and weekends. We realized we liked working with each other and kind of took the plunge into entrepreneurship together.
Got it.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting story, and that's really great that you started a career in Cisco. But as you said, you are into the software development, and now you are into the payments industry. What made you shift from being in the corporate culture to jumping into getting a startup into a payments industry or fintech world?
Yeah.
What?
So kind of like peeling back the layers here. I studied economics at OSU. And I think the cool thing about econ is that you're always looking at the world, not just at like supply and demand, but as like cause and effect, right? And I think one of the most influential classes I took was in money and banking, and really learning sort of how the world works, and like sort of the four pillars of economics is like land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, and how like money sort of empowers all of this. I think until that point, money just felt like one of those things you earn, you burn, and you kind of like continue that cycle. But coming out of that class, it became really clear to me that like money is a tool. It's something that can have a great impact on people's lives, and not just in the sense of like you come upon a windfall. And so I was always interested in like the impact of money on people's lives. And so there was always this idea of like, wanting to do something around that, but I just didn't know what I didn't know at the time, right? I was 23. And so, Sandeep and I, we did a startup right after Cisco. We went through like an accelerator, we raised a little bit of money. And when that failed, like it crashed and burned. I realized that like there were two things that I knew that I didn't know. One was how like great startups run, right? I had only seen whatever I had done myself. I hadn't been in that environment before. And the second thing I knew was that I wanted to do something somewhat either related to money movement or payments. And so what's funny is like my first choice was to try to get a job at another big company called Square. That didn't work out. And I actually ended up getting a offer to join a small company called Zen Payroll. It's now known as Gusto. And so Gusto is where I really got that taste of like what a financial service provider is, what the true impact is of providing that kind of service, especially payroll. It's like a regulated financial service, and really getting to see how great founders build generational businesses. And I think like that was such an eye-opener for me to see folks who are like, they're 3 to 4 years into the life cycle of their business, and the way that they were thinking about it was in terms of decades, right? This wasn't just an all-out cash grab. It was a much more like deliberate march uphill to a certain promised land with a very, very clear product thesis on how to get there. And that's kind of what like opened my eyes up to the world of payments itself. It's funny, one of the founders of Gusto, he wrote this awesome blog post that I still think about today. It was called like A Developer's Perspective on ACH. It's by Eddie Kim. And like, I remember reading that and kind of connecting that to my money and banking class, and thinking like, wow, like I've read about this stuff before. Here are people who are actually like executing and using these tools and systems in a way that like provides value, has impact, and does it in a way that like feels really great. And so that's kind of how I journeyed into payments itself.
Just to backtrack a little bit, like you kind of glazed over the Gusto experience. Like they're a $1 billion valuation company now. Something went really right there, as opposed to your startup, which you kind of glazed over also. Like, why did your startup fail? And like go into like the culture of Gusto. Did they have a lot of meetings? Like, did your company have a lot of meetings? Like people, a lot of people are like anti-meeting, and some people are really about like being in the office. Like, what was it about your startup that like wasn't working? And then going to the other extreme, which was Gusto, which is a multi-billion dollar valuation company. Like they were a rocket ship.
So I think there are a couple things with our startup that kind of went wrong. Number one was we kind of, Daniel, you and I were talking about this before we started the recording. We ended up ignoring the golden rule, which is always talk to your customers. And I think like once we kind of got into this accelerator called Plug and Play, we had talked to a bunch of customers. We thought we had folks who wanted to use it, and we're like, great, now we seem to start building and really trying to like push the pedal to the metal on building out the product. So we hired interns. We set up shop in a co-working space in Sunnyvale and just started to like slog and code and, test things out. But I don't think we ever really shipped or like launched. And we basically got to a point where like, you're doing all this work, you're not seeing any results. You don't even feel any momentum, right? And so I think like Sandeep and I had a pretty big falling out as a result of that. Like we both were just like, this isn't working. And, we'd never been through that kind of experience before. And so the only emotion that you can react with there is frustration at the time, right? It's not like now I'm much older and I think, a little bit more pensive, but back then it was just this realization that, wow, like we don't know what we don't know. And it was funny because like we had an investor who introduced us to someone and they're like, this team is young. They don't know what they don't know, just a heads up. And at that point, I remember reading that and being like, I don't know what the hell that means, but I don't like it. And I think about that a lot because now one of the first things Sandeep and I think about or talk about is like, what are the known unknowns? Like, what are the things we have no idea about that could potentially sink this business, right? Or what are the things we know that we've identified needing more information on to kind of unlock the next feature or that next like growth wave? So that was kind of where my startup failed. Now, when I came to Gusto, I was on an early sales hire. And I think the cool thing about Gusto was like the sheer like laser focus that the founders had on what they were doing was something I had never seen before, right? In a world where like we love to chase trends, right? And like AI, we're just going to say it, right? Everyone wants to do stuff with AI. Everyone's trying to make like a co-pilot for X, Y, and Z. I think it's super valuable. I think we're going to see a lot of folks that like chase the trend, burn out really fast because they lose momentum. And then they'll kind of be in the same position I was in versus there are other folks who've been in AI since before it was hot. They like have a very opinionated and clear view of like the world before and after, and are kind of like dedicated to that progress and that journey. And I think in Gusto's case, like the founders were all 100% aligned that like payroll is the key to unlocking all of this other value for small businesses. Like if we do payroll right and we do it in a way that's completely like a breath of fresh air compared to what's going on with incumbents in the industry, this is our opportunity to take. And so what was like, that was, I think, the first thing, right? I remember like asking Josh, the CEO, when I first started about all these different trends and like how Gusto was thinking about it. And he like looked at me point blank and was like, I don't care what analysts or VCs are saying is the trend. This is what we're focused on. This is where this business is going. And this is what we know we have to do. And so like, at that point, when we were Zen Payroll, everyone would compare us to Zenefits, right? Zenefits was like this huge rocket ship. They're like the opposite side of the payroll product. They're benefits first, right? There's a ton of cash you can get from being a benefits broker. And in our case, we were like, look, we recognize that opportunity is there. It's not going anywhere. It's just going to get bigger. But the real way to take advantage of that is to own the payroll data first and provide this like really great payroll experience across all 50 states. And once we do that, then we can march towards every other benefit and like providing this full suite HR platform. And so like, I think it's counterintuitive, right? To just double down on one thing and do that one thing really well. But that stuck with me. The other thing that stuck with me was, at least as a sales culture, we were told the point wasn't to try to win a business today at the cost of tomorrow. Right. And I think Josh said this a lot, like heroes today become martyrs tomorrow. And that was always like kind of the culture of, look, we're going to do things in a scalable way. We're never going to do things for short-term gains at long-term costs. And so when it came to like sales, it was like, look, if someone's not a good fit, send them to a competitor, right? if like let them know why they're not a good fit for us and what their options are, and just be okay with that, and they'll come back in the future, which was pretty great. We never had to hard sell anyone or hard close anyone. It was just set up in such a way that like the product itself is what stood out. At the end of the day, whether someone buys it or not is not on us to convince them. It's more on like us to qualify them. So I think that that approach is really what like set Gusto up on this path where like, look, Zenefits, they were a great business. They ultimately exited to TriNet, probably not for as much as they wanted to. But like Gusto's still around today, right? And they're like this decacorn. They've got multiple offices all across the country, offering tons of different products. And so I think having seen it now 10 years, almost 10 years later, I think the approach makes a lot of sense. But hindsight is 2020.
And you, so it sounds like you had a rough go of it, like with your co-founder in the first time. It's rare to see co-founders get back together that had like, it sounds like a falling out. Like,
Yeah.
is that what made you guys want to work together again? Like what was that like? You had a conversation, you reached out, like what was it?
Yeah. So I remember we had a really bad sort of falling out over email. We didn't talk to each other for like a month. And then one day for me, like I realized that it's very rare to meet someone who is like the exact opposite in terms of strengths and skill sets as you. Like Sandeep and I have this really nice dynamic where whatever his weaknesses are my strengths and vice versa. And we were also both motivated to do things for the same reason, right? It's maybe it's ego, maybe it's just to show ourselves we can, but like there's this intrinsic motivation to want to build something big. And so we both kind of realized, like when I called him, he apologized to me first. He was like, and I think we both realized that like, while the idea may not have worked, the team is strong. And like, it's hard to find someone that complimentary. It's rare, right? Like, not to say it's impossible, but I think both of us had like worked with other people before. We'd like, I always say like we kiss a lot of frogs until you find your like prince. But I think that's what really did it for us, was like one, humility, knowing where we were wrong, knowing that like I knew that I said things I shouldn't have. I knew that like ultimately it wasn't me getting mad at him for his shortcomings. It was more frustration with my own shortcomings, and kind of coming to grips with that. And I think the other thing was that through being co-founders, we also became like best friends. And I think that also is what made the difference.
Got it. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So you went through an accelerator for your first one, Plug and Play.
Yeah.
I don't know much about Plug and Play. I know they have a massive building in Sunnyvale.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful building. It's very it has like an energy of collaboration in some senses, and like I don't know, it has like trophies on the wall in a sense, like all these
Yeah.
pictures of all these like mega home run companies. Is it like Y Combinator? Is it completely different? Like
Yeah. So Plug and Play it's an interesting beast. Like their primary business model is actually selling corporate innovation memberships. So like they have the co-working space. They basically open that up to startups, and they say you can come work here for cheap. We'll introduce you to investors, we'll introduce you to potential customers. And then they're turning around to large corporates like Volkswagen or IBM and being like, "Hey, I have a whole portfolio of startups that you can choose from. So if you're thinking about like your innovation center or your like R&D center and you want like ideas or inspiration, here's what's going on in Silicon Valley." And so they had a accelerator program. They modeled it off of YC. And we went through all of that, and I think it was helpful, right? We definitely learned a lot of stuff. They put us through a lot of events. We got to pitch a lot of VCs, got to talk to a lot of enterprises, and that was cool. But like, I couldn't help but feel like we were the product for Plug and Play. And while they were helping us, I think, we were getting less from the deal than they were.
I see. It interestingly enough, like I heard A16Z is very similar in the sense that they bring large company CEOs to A16Z to like,
Mhm.
and then they bring in all the CEOs of their portfolios like one after another to like, whatever, the CEO of Disney And the CEO of
Yeah.
Disney will just like see the portfolio and be like, oh, I like that one because it has to do with like entertainment. Maybe I'll use their product. So it's
Yep.
similar in that sense, which is different than YC, I think, right? Like YC is more
Yeah. YC is
network.
way more focused, I think. I like to think of YC as like no bullshit, right? Like they're not trying to, like, ultimately there's some ulterior motive to like putting the CEO of Disney in front of all these portfolio companies, whether it's like deal flow or like an exit, right? Like, and it's the same with plug and play and other folks. And like that's fine. But I think YC kind of stripped away all of that. And they're like, all of those kind of situations are earned organically by building a great product and building a great business. Like you can't just jump from point A to point Z. You have to like put in the work and pay your dues to get to that place. And I think like it's harder, but it's way more fulfilling. It's easier to focus. And like, the job is simpler, or it's just talk to customers, build product. That's it. And like all this other fancy, sexy stuff can come later.
Got it. Yeah, I know you worked at like Bill.com a little bit, correct?
Yeah, I came to Bill.com through an acquisition of a company called Invoice to Go.
Oh, so you were okay. So you did a lot. Okay, so you worked at Gusto.
I've had a pretty like storied career over the last 10 years. Kind of like if to just to like quickly summarize it. So Gusto got a ton of experience with SMB sales. Was a sales manager there, got to learn how inside sales work, how to set up a team and how to run that. Realized I wanted to get more mid-market and enterprise experience. And so I went to a company called TalkDesk as a customer success manager. And so way more traditional customer success, working with brands like Evernote, Herschel Supply, Cloudera to figure out how to set up and optimize their call centers. Because at Gusto, we were an inside sales team, did a lot of call center work. And so after that, I had one of my mentors actually tapped me on the shoulder and told me that he was joining a PE-backed company called Magento. And he was leading a new team that was responsible for taking Magento and like a very flat revenue product line, turning it around and launching it as a cloud-based service. And so there, I kind of got to combine a little bit of everything from my past experiences where Magento served the whole segment of the market from SMB all the way to enterprise. So I got to apply my past experiences in a business operations role, thinking about everything from revenue ops to strategy to how we think about scaling out pricing and like optimizing this new product. And so that Magento ended up getting bought by Adobe. It was a huge exit. And so I actually ended up at Adobe in 2018, towards the end of 2019. And so there, still that's where I moved into like product management on the growth side. And so kind of if you think about the career trajectory, started as an associate PM, became a founder, became a sales leader, enterprise CSM, business operations, I guess person or associate, and then product manager. And from there, I did an audit of kind of past experiences, past problems, and as I came up against my vest date at Adobe, I realized I wanted to get back into startups. Sandeep and I had already been doing a bunch of customer discovery on different ideas throughout all this time. And so in 2020, we actually both quit our day jobs and we bootstrapped our second business. It was an onboarding platform for like enterprise customer success teams. And so we ran that product for about a year and a half. We launched right as the pandemic started. And so like, imagine you're quitting your day job. You've got a pipeline of like 10 to 15 people who say, yes, I want this. I'm gonna roll this out to my team of 20 CSMs. Then like a month later, they're telling you that like, I just fired that entire team, right? Like everything's completely frozen. We don't know what's going on with the world. And so we struggled for that year to try to figure out what we're gonna do. We won some customers. We were seeing some traction. And ultimately that business is a lifestyle business today. It's still running, but we ran out of money. And so at that point, I reached back out to my mentor who was at Invoice to Go. And, I was like, hey, like, he had been talking to me for a while because he had wanted to recruit me there. And I was like, tell me about Invoice to Go. What are you guys doing? And he told me that like, look, it's almost the same deal as Magento again, flat revenue on a single flagship product. We have this whole strategy now of going all in for an all-in-one financial service provider, and we need payments people to come help us. And so for me, I felt like that was finally the call, right? Like I can now take my project experience, my love for payments, and really put it together and like in an environment where you can learn a lot, right? The cool thing about Invoice2go, kind of unlike e-commerce, you're dealing with people who are delivering work in the physical world, right? Services businesses. You're dealing with like core sort of business processes with invoices and purchase orders and expense management. And then we were dealing with a lot of really sexy technologies. So like BASes, we were like one of Unit's like first customers, thinking through some more complicated payment stuff, like how we move away from Stripe to Adyen, how we think about trying to move the product itself away from being a core SaaS business to just being a transaction-based business where we're actually ending up making more revenue by giving the product away for free than if we were to charge for it. And so there at Invoice2go, I helped launch bank accounts. I started looking at payment methods like buy now, pay later for like home services and general contracting. And along that point, we ended up getting bought by Bill.com to help fill out their invoicing suite. So, you know, that's kind of how I ended up at Bill. This was September of 2021. Was when we ended up fully getting acquired into the mothership. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I ended up at Bill. I know a bit of a long-winded story, sorry, but it's a wild ride.
It's interesting because like you've been in so many different places. Like I think it gives you an advantage over a lot of entrepreneurs who, you know, either have just been an entrepreneur their whole life or just worked at large companies, or you know, the fact that you hopped around, I feel like it's a benefit to your experience overall,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't think it was a deterrent in any way.
Yeah, thank you for that. I always looked at it as like, look, I was in my 20s and like your 20s are all about learning. And I just felt like I'd always tap out at different places in terms of what I could learn. So then it would be time to look for that next thing.
That's awesome, yeah, and really great. So if you want to talk about Mercoa, what is your opportunity space, who
Yeah.
you are targeting to, and what are you designing for? What's the thing?
Yeah. So at Mercoa, we are building an embedded bill pay API. What we do is we let B2B platforms and vertical SaaS companies launch their own bill pay and accounts payable product suite to their users. And, you know, Mercoa was something that actually came to me while I was at Bill. I actually tried to build an internal version of Mercoa for Bill.com to help integrate their core AP offering with Invoice2go's banking product. And I think what I learned during that time was sort of the sleeping giant opportunity with AP, where, you know, I think when people talk to me, I tell them all the time, like we are at sort of the very beginning innings of this move towards the financial operating system, right? Like everybody wants to be an all-in-one, one-stop shop to help their customers manage money in, money out, and sort of the holy grail is let me model your cash flow for you. So you, business owner, always know where you're at in terms of your like business life cycle and company health. And what I found was that like, while it's not easy, but it's become easier to help your customers accept payments on things like invoices. The idea of helping them pay their bills is something that like there's still a lot of ambiguity around. And something people ask us all the time is like, what's so hard about building AP? And the thing I always tell them is like, look, there are multiple billion-dollar companies built on just AP itself. And so like, if you're looking to launch this to your users, you are setting yourself up for like death by a thousand cuts if you think this is something you can build with a small product team. There's a whole like array of contexts you need to have and systems you need to build to not only provide an accounts payable experience that helps your customers manage when and how they pay an invoice, but also help you monetize on that and provide that as part of your product suite in a way that gives them more value than just that core workflow itself. And so, that's what we're building today. I think the cool thing that we've kind of learned as we've gone through this path is when we originally started the business, we thought the types of platforms that would eat up Mercoa are folks who are serving SMBs. And what we found now is that the types of companies that really benefit from our accounts payable suite are folks who are trying to move up market within their vertical or their niche. And so, like, I always like to tell people this story. We're working with a customer right now who they're in the property management space. They're like an all-in-one financial solution for Airbnb companies, right? You've got like 10, 15 Airbnbs, you want banking, you want a way to accept payments and kind of manage your spend. You can do that through their platform. When we started working with them in May, they came to us and they told us, they're like, we are starting to talk to customers with 100 properties and more. And they're telling us they will not move over to us until we give them a way to manage all of their spend on our platform. Meaning we have to go beyond cards. We have to start figuring out a way to manage invoices, bulk payments, and vendors in order to do this. And so, what was funny is when we had talked to them a month before, they're like, this is great. We'll come back to it in the future. 3 weeks later, they're like, we absolutely need this right now, or we're not going to be able to win this new set of business. And what we found over the last 3 months is that every month they've been adding another customer to their platform larger than the first one. And so all of a sudden they went from like, you've got 15 Airbnbs, maybe you're doing like 1 to 3 million a year in revenue and holding that on platform, to like having 100 plus Airbnbs, $18 million worth of like assets under management for one company itself. And like that has been a huge unlock for them. And I think as we're looking around now, we talk to a lot of folks who are like, yeah, I have bill pay, right? I have like a way for my customers to upload an invoice and then manage and pay that. But what they end up telling us is like, it's not being used very much because we're missing all of this other core workflows. We're missing approvals, we're missing automation, we're missing the vendor experience. And more than that, they're telling us like, my larger customers aren't even thinking about this because they look at this and they say, it's just way too rudimentary for my organization. Like, how am I supposed to roll this out across the company?
So you guys are an API that they can like build perfect integration for like they have a product they want to like layer in billing into their product directly, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. So they can do it. We have customers who are embedding bill pay directly into their product. And then we have customers who are building entire standalone AP automation solutions or bill pay solutions directly on our API as like a second product. And so we support both today. The reason we do that is we always tell folks there's like a graduation path, right? If you're trying to de-risk this opportunity, the easiest way to do it is to just drop it into your product and launch it to your users right away. We can kind of give you feature parity with what's available in the market, right? So I always tell people, like, if you want Bill.com level functionality, but your own skin, your own experience, and your own control over the customer data, Mercoa can give you that right out of the box. If you want to like build your own experience, you want to control the look and feel, we can do that as well. But why don't you gather the data and insights on what that experience should be while having users get used to managing all of their payments through your platform, and then graduate them to this standalone product in the future. And so it's something that we're seeing is starting to stick with folks of like, yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity around this opportunity. Like, we talked to a lot of VPs of fintech who are like, yeah, my CEO wants us to be the Bill.com of our niche, but I have no idea what that entails. And so when they tell us that, we're like, okay, cool. How would you like to start getting customer feedback on this space within like 3 weeks? Because we can do that. And that's the same time your PM would use to just start doing customer discovery interviews. And so it's that has been the approach for us so far.
There's a lot of new stuff coming out like FedNow. Do you think that's going to change the way that people do business? Is it going to hurt things like crypto? It's such a new thing. I've been hearing the adoption is slow, but it's starting to
Yeah.
happen. But let's fast forward 10 years. Like, does that change anything in
So
reality? Yeah.
I think it'll change the behavior of businesses in terms of how they make payments and sort of what the accepted norm is on payment timing. To your point, though, like the rollout of FedNow is going to go the same way the rollout of any sort of payment infrastructure happens, meaning it's not going to be everywhere all at once overnight. Kind of similar to like this like private real-time payment network. FedNow is going to follow a very similar approach where like you will have the who's who of the banking and financial services industry adopted immediately. And then over time, these smaller organizations and financial institutions like credit unions will adopt it as well. I think it's going to accelerate business payments, but something a lot of people talk about is like, oh, with the rollout of FedNow, isn't that going to just kill my payments business and my payments margin? And I think the thing that people need to realize is like, even if you, Mr. or Mrs. Fintech, want to offer customers payment through FedNow, you still have to partner with a bank, and the bank isn't going to give you FedNow for free, right? Like, sure, you get instant settlement and instant payments, but nothing is free, right? They're like JPMC is still going to charge you a pretty penny to have like an FBO account connected to FedNow, the same way they're charging people a pretty penny to have FBO accounts connected to RTP. And so that's kind of where I think it will move the industry forward in terms of people expecting payments immediately. I don't think it's going to cannibalize people's margins as much. If anything, I think it'll probably make it better, because now you can offer an instant payment experience that you may have been paying 10 cents per transaction at like an order of magnitude cheaper, because it's a like federally regulated sort of payment network, not a privately owned one. Yeah.
Was there a you said a lot like FBOs, like few other things in there. Like, why is it so slow for people to move money? Is it because of fraud? Is it because of like just the platforms out there are antiquated? Like, why are things not so, you know, there's Venmo is pretty amazing because it just kind of flips things on its head, where like you could send money to somebody and they have it in their account literally within like a second,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's almost like Venmo is Fed in some senses. Like, it's like letting people move money personally and for businesses like very quickly. Like,
Yeah.
why are things so like backwards, like in our, you know, in the world? Like,
So there's a couple of reasons for this. I think one is definitely like fraud minimization, right? I think the sort of counterintuitive, the counterintuitive learning of like fintech space is that sometimes having friction in the experience is a good thing, because it prevents your platform from being hit with fraud or having bad actors take certain actions on the platform. That's one thing. And so, a lot of companies will end up offering what's called a closed loop payment experience, where their user is already onboarded with the product, and then the recipient is also onboarded into the product. So like Venmo is a great example of a closed loop system where you can send money to anyone in the world as long as they have a Venmo account. And what that, like, at the underlying basis, it's basically one big bank account that Venmo owns, and they're just moving the funds from one wallet in that bank account to another. But when you want to take those funds off platform to your bank account, right? That is going to be a 3 to 5 day by ACH type of time frame experience. That's just normal, like how the ACH works. And then, Venmo will give you the ability to get it instantly as well for 1%. And there, what they've done is kind of like underwritten you for risk. They know you're not committing fraud. They know that you're not a bad actor. And so they're willing to take the risk of just sending the money to your account immediately. I think Bill.com does something very similar as well. And actually quite a few payment providers do something similar, where they're willing to offer payment services in a closed loop fashion, where both the payer and the recipient, if they're both on platform, then like you're sending the money instantly. But for the recipient to like get those funds and use them, they're going to have to take that off platform. And that itself takes 3 to 5 days by standard, or, you can instantly get it as well. But so in doing the closed loop way, companies are able to underwrite both sides. They're able to run both sides through KYB and fraud checks. and they're able to like, with a certain degree of confidence, know that they're not at risk of breaking any like money laundering rules. They're not at any risk of putting like their underlying bank or their own money transmission licenses at risk. There's a whole like depth of compliance that comes in that kind of gets easier when you have a closed loop system. And so that's part of the reason why things are so slow.
Would you say, and this is a controversial statement, there's companies like FTX that were out there and they basically owned all the crypto that people put in.
Yeah.
Would you say Venmo is similar in that way, where like you put your money into their system and then they're just routing it where they need to? FTX was basically like they own the crypto that you put in some crazy way. Like, I don't know if that was legal.
Yeah.
There's probably Venmo is probably doing this in a way more scrutinized, safe way,
Yep.
but it's not a bank account, right? So like they can technically.
So technically, and I'm not a Venmo expert, but
Yeah.
like the way that we've seen this kind of shake out is normally there is like a bank account underneath the covers. It's just that to a Venmo user, it will not look like a bank account. So like Venmo owns the Venmo bank account that every Venmo account is created against. Each account is a wallet that is tied to that bank account. So like, let's say that you wanted to pay Agam on Venmo. Both of you are signing up for Venmo. You have a sub wallet on Venmo's bank account. And now you funded that wallet and you're going to send Agam like $5. Venmo's just saying, cool, I'm going to move it from this wallet to this wallet. And it's instant because it's all staying in this bank account. I'm just moving the numbers from one place to another. Like, but there is a bank that's holding those funds at the end of the day. And like Venmo is being held accountable to the bank's standards for compliance, for standards for security, and sort of, I guess, PayPal now, right? But like, they're the ones who are taking on all of that sort of ownership of risk. Yeah.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. But if Venmo goes down, PayPal goes down, meaning like say, whatever, some reason there's a problem. People lose their money because it's not FDIC insured. It may not be in their name. You know, that's where it's like
Yeah.
murky
So
waters. Yeah.
I think they're like, it would depend on how they've set up the relationship with the bank. Normally, like the way that and again, like for people on the internet, don't quote me on this directly. This is just my understanding based on my experience. Normally, the type of account that's being used for this is what's called an FBO account, or a for benefit of account. It is a premium bank account that banks will offer to customers to be able to hold and move money on behalf of their users. And so like, unlike, a checking account or what, if there's like a bank run, right, and your checking account, those funds are FDIC insured, right? But I think with an FBO, it's always kind of meant to be this like weird sort of escrow or like temporary in-flight cash holding. And so the risk of like a bank run ruining an FBO, like funds held in an FBO, are a little bit lower. The bigger risk is that like, a bunch of hackers hack your users, they take over their accounts, and then they're like, great, I'm going to now siphon off all of these funds from Venmo into my bank account itself. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So that's where there's higher risk.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, people are moving money out of Venmo. Like they're moving it from point A to point B and getting it out.
Yeah. Or Venmo will give them a card, right? They can give you a debit card and you can spend with your Venmo card directly from that bank account or that wallet. Now they're doing things like offering credit, or I think for a while they were letting you buy crypto through Venmo as well and just hold it in Venmo.
Right. Yeah. One more interesting thing Venmo is doing. I recently came across about the the debit card for teenagers from age group 13 to 17. What's your take on it?
Man, I think I am always super apprehensive about creating any services for kids and teenagers. Like I'm a B2B guy. It's just my like bread and butter. Consumer stuff is just very risky. Like the amount of like, not even fraud, but like I was a teenager once. Like I've definitely overdrafted on my debit card when trying to buy something. Like I just think the risk there is so high that like, I'm sure they have some secret insight or secret perspective on how to pull it off. it just gives me a little bit of anxiety.
Yeah, so one thing they say that, your teenager's account will be associated with the parent's account,
Yeah.
and the parents are responsible to load the account and then they can use the card.
Yep.
That's added layer on it.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's one of those things where like you put $100 on your kid's account and then they go to buy something for like 150, right? And like that, like, I don't know. There's just always this like fear of like children they're not born fiscally savvy, right? They have to learn it. And so, yeah, I don't know. Like we've been hit with an NSF before in a B2B setting, and it wasn't great. And so we did a lot of work to try to figure that out. I don't even know what you would do in this kind of case where like your child is now paying for something like overdrafted on their Venmo account. Venmo is now going to pull that from your bank account. And like, what happens if you don't have enough money in your Venmo account? Do they pull it directly from your end bank account? Like all of that's like the details to think about when you're trying to provide a product like this.
Right. Super interesting, Sai. This is super interesting. I know we're running up at like the end of the 1 hour mark.
Mm-hmm.
I guess Agam, any like ending questions at a high level you'd like to ask Sai?
Sure, yeah. So what do you see the trend in the payment space gonna be like in the accounts payment space? Let's say 5 years, 10 years down the line. We
Yeah.
asked this to everyone, like, is AI gonna play a big role in it? Is any new technology gonna be coming up and gonna change the space or some innovation? What's your take on it?
Yeah. So I think yes to all of the above. Trend wise, one, we are like something we see constantly is that like we are living in a fully globalized society now. Cross-border businesses are the norm. More and more organizations are trying to figure out how to pay vendors real time internationally in a variety of options, whether that's sending the vendor their local currency, whether it's sending them USD, whether it's giving them some sort of prepaid card. So that is a trend we expect to continue. I think on the sort of trend of financial one-stop shops or, sort of all-in-one solutions, we're at the very early innings of that. So what you're seeing now with like the Ramps, the Brexes, the Bill.coms of the world is horizontal platforms all going AP and AR and then bringing in cash flow management. We are going to see more and more of that as time goes on in very specific niches too, from like field services, transportation logistics, construction, real estate, property tech. It's coming. The founders who are going to build those products are starting them now, or they started them close to 3 to 5 years ago. And everyone is going to be battling to be their customer's financial operating system. As far as AI will play a huge role in certain segments actually in all segments of the market, but in different ways. Like on the SMB side, like across all segments, AI will be super useful for coding and like making sure that things get logged correctly. But like on the SMB side, I see a lot of opportunity for AI to help SMB owners manage sort of when and how to pay invoices so that they're managing cash flow. On the more mid-market enterprise side, I see a lot of AI applications around how you code and tag each of the transactions, how you're able to match them up to things like receipts and purchase orders, and taking care of sort of what's traditionally referred to as like back office work, where like there's now a cost to processing invoices. We see a lot of application for AI there. And then, with mid-market and enterprise customers, they're always a little bit more sophisticated in terms of their finances and how they think about that stuff. So we will see more sort of LLM products helping them gather financial insights into their business. And I think a great sort of potential player for that is our friends at Just Paid. I think, just even some of the stuff that they're doing around looking at like contracts and comparing invoices against contracts, that's something that I think will become the norm as we move forward. So I'm pretty excited for it. That's sort of what we've seen early innings for AI. I think there will also be use cases that I'm not even thinking about today. But 10 years is a long time. There's a lot of data to collect and feed into these models to unlock new value.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this was great, Sai. Thank you so much for being on. You're our second guest, so First guests will be coming out in about a week or so, and then you're going to be our next guest on the podcast. So keep an eye out. We'll edit it, post it, and then it'll be live. But this was awesome. Thank
Sounds
you
good.
for taking an hour out of your day. I know you're busy running your startup, so
thank you guys for having me and for the opportunity. It's always great to catch up with you, Daniel, and get to meet you, Agam. Like, it's just fun to be included with this stuff. So thanks again.
This was great. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all your insights.
Yeah,
Awesome. Loved it.
Thank you. All right. I'll see you guys soon.